Welcome to my channel, where there are interesting and equally sensational stories. Listen to today's story. I'm a 25-year-old male and I've been in a relationship with my wife who is 27 years old for 8.5 years. Last August, during our trip to the USA, I proposed to her. We legally got married 10 weeks ago, had a church ceremony 5 weeks ago, and went on our honeymoon 2 weeks after that. During our honeymoon, I noticed something unusual for the first time. She was constantly texting on her phone and tried to hide it or turn off the display whenever I glanced at it to see who she was talking to. When I asked, she claimed she was texting her friends or her sister. This made me suspicious. And in the beginning the second week, I decided to check her phone while she was asleep. It was the first time I had ever felt the need to do this because I had always trusted her. To my shock, I discovered that the woman I believed loved me. The one I had married just a month prior was cheating on me with someone else, a 39-year-old man. He works as a cook where she is employed, so they see each other daily during the week. We still had to stay together for the rest of the week and our flight home during our honeymoon, so I didn't confront her about it at that time because I didn't want to have a fight while on our honeymoon. I have no idea how I managed to hold it in. After further investigation, when we returned home, I found out that their relationship had begun at the end of November last year. Which was after our engagement, but well before our wedding. I don't understand why she didn't mention this to me earlier when we had plenty of time to cancel our wedding. Somehow, I didn't catch on until it was too late. I haven't talked to my wife about this yet, so she doesn't know that I'm aware of her affair. However, I think she might suspect that I'm suspicious of something. We still have tasks left, like selecting our wedding photos for the album and writing thank you letters for the gifts we received, which is why I haven't brought up this issue until now. But I'm feeling really tormented inside, and I need to address this situation. I'm currently looking into whether I can legally remove her from our house. We rented it together, and both our names are on the contract. And whether our wedding can be annulled or if I need to go through a divorce process. Here's an important detail. The other guy is separated from his wife and has 2 teenage children. He's not getting a divorce right now because they have some outstanding loans to repay. Additionally, they frequently express their love for each other and a desire to be together fully, but they can't do so at the moment. From what I know, their plan involves my wife having children with me since the other guy already has some. And then when he's ready, either divorced or otherwise, they will pursue a relationship together. My dilemma is that I feel guilty for contemplating divorce less than 2 months after our wedding, especially after the big celebration and all the gifts we received. However, I can't continue living like this. I'm not sure what I'm expecting from you all. Maybe just confirmation that I'm making the right choice by leaving her and seeking a divorce. Thank you for any advice or insights you can provide. Best regards. Update. I'm planning to speak with our office lawyer today to see if they have any information on this matter. If they don't, I'll contact a specific lawyer to get some advice on how to proceed. Regarding our financial situation, neither of us is wealthy. We're both doing okay. If she worked full-time like I do, she currently works 75% due to her employer's restrictions, she would actually earn more than me. My parents, on the other hand, are reasonably well off, but not excessively so. I guess you could say they're upper middle class. However, everything I owned before our marriage remains mine. And everything she owned before our marriage remains hers. Anything acquired or purchased after our marriage will be divided. She also won't inherit anything from my parents because it's my right to receive it. And this was the case before we got married. Update 1. I've discussed the matter with the lawyer in our office who doesn't have much knowledge about it. They provided me with contact information for someone who should be able to assist me. I'm planning to call them today or tomorrow. And arrange a meeting as soon as possible. I'll keep you all updated on how things progress. Thanks to everyone for your support in the meantime. Update 2. I've spoken with the lawyer and she needs to research whether having another relationship is sufficient grounds for annulling the marriage. In all her years of handling divorces, it's the first time someone has contacted her so soon after getting married, and she expressed her sympathy for my situation. However, she's looking into it and will inform me of the available options in a few days. I'll keep you posted once she gets back to me. Update 3. I have up to 6 months from the marriage to initiate an annulment. So I have some time to talk to the priest and explore the possibility of annulling the wedding in the church. I plan to focus on my upcoming school exams over the next 2 weeks and then discuss this matter with my wife calmly. The challenge is figuring out how to start this conversation with her without making it sound harsh, like, "Hey, I know you're cheating on me." Update 4. I've had a discussion with our priest, and it turns out he can also initiate an enrollment process. However, he suggested that I first talk to my wife about it without immediately jumping to divorce. He wants her to decide whether she wants to stay with me or not. I'm unsure about giving her that choice because I'm not sure I can ever trust her again. The tricky part is figuring out how to begin this conversation with her. I know there's no perfect moment, but perhaps you can provide some advice. What should I say? What should I avoid saying? The priest advised me not to focus on her faults, but instead express how my feelings are hurt and how our marriage feels strained. I shouldn't bring up forgiveness, but should offer my help. I should provide enough information so she understands that I'm aware of her cheating, but I shouldn't reveal too much. It's probably better to consult my lawyer first to understand the next steps and discuss the house we're renting together. The contract has both our names. And only then have the conversation with my wife. Hello, everyone. A lot has transpired since my last post. Previously, I inquired about whether I should address the issue or proceed with divorce or annulment. I provided updates regarding my conversations with a lawyer who informed me that I could request an annulment within 6 months of marriage. However, since cheating isn't explicitly mentioned in the law as grounds for annulment, she couldn't guarantee a 100% success rate for annulment. So in the worst-case scenario, I'll proceed with a divorce. I also consulted our priest. And from the church's perspective, I can request an annulment at any time provided I can prove that the cheating occurred before, during and after the marriage. Fortunately, I have all the necessary evidence to establish this. When I confided in my friends, they unanimously recommended that I ask her to leave my home immediately. Consequently, after gathering all the requisite information, I confronted my wife about this matter 3 weeks ago. Our conversation was filled with tears, some raised voices, although I managed to remain composed, and we discussed a multitude of issues in the subsequent days. We even spent a weekend away together to address everything privately. In summary, she doesn't have a clear reason for why she cheated on me. It just happened. She didn't bring it up earlier because she feared my reaction, thinking I might get angry, leave her alone and go away, which raises the question of what she expected to happen when I found out after we got married. She assured me that she still loves me. So I asked her to figure out what she truly wants and what she's willing to do to salvage our marriage. Depending on her decision, I would then determine whether I wanted to give it another shot with her or not, although I was already about 90% inclined to leave her. After a week, I still hadn't received a clear answer from her about whether she wanted me or the other guy. So I made the decision for both of us. If she couldn't decide between her husband and her lover within less than 3 months of marriage, then I could certainly decide whether I wanted to spend my life with her or not. 2 weeks ago, we mutually agreed to end our relationship. The unfortunate part is that during this whole time, she didn't ask me once to stay. She was sad about me leaving, but I think she was also happy about the prospect of pursuing a relationship with the other guy. Last week, I disclosed the entire situation to my parents and brothers. They were all saddened by the news, but understood the situation and agreed that it's the best decision for me. On the same day, my wife also informed her parents and they asked her to leave their home. She had to stay with some friends temporarily but has since rented an apartment and is in the process of moving her belongings out of my house. In 10 days, I'll be meeting with the lawyer to initiate the process for an annulment of our marriage. I also need to give the priest an update that my wife has moved out of my house and then request the annulment through the church. At this point, I'm at a loss for words. My marriage didn't even last 3 months. And it seems my wife was almost relieved to part ways. So I feel there's nothing more to be said. I realized that I still need some time to heal from all of this, but things are slowly improving. I'm getting accustomed to being on my own and handling all the household responsibilities. I appreciate your support. Now I have to start over with my life. And I hope to find someone who truly loves me one day. Story 2. I'm a 22-year-old guy. And I have suspicions about something going on between my girlfriend, Alexis, 22 female, and my friend, Derek, 21, male. We all live together and sometimes I wonder if I'm just imagining things. The four of us attended the same university and our apartment, which Alexis and our mutual friend Brooke, 22 female, originally leased, is large and expensive. Initially, there were supposed to be 3 girls living here, but the third person backed out suddenly. Although they planned to move to a cheaper place, they had invested a lot in this apartment and didn't want to leave. When my lease ended 6 months ago, I suggested moving in to split the rent and utilities 3 ways as I was already staying over frequently. Both girls were thrilled with the idea. Shortly before I moved in, Brooke started dating my best friend, Derek, which seemed great because it meant both couples could hang out with their significant others and best friends all together. Derek began staying over more often, and when his parents recently sold their house and left town, he temporarily moved in with us. We haven't pressured him to find a new place because sharing expenses among 4 people is financially beneficial for all of us. However, it's important to note that only Alexis and Brooke are on the lease. Surprisingly, the apartment owner doesn't mind our living situation as long as the rent is paid because we're quiet. However, there have been 3 incidents that have raised suspicions for me. I want to clarify that I wouldn't make an accusation like this if it weren't for these incidents. Alexis is a sweet and shy girl, and Derek has been like a brother to me. They don't appear flirtatious, but as I mentioned earlier, all 4 of us are very close friends and spend a lot of time together. Brooke and I have early classes, so we leave by 8 a.m. Derek and Alexis have afternoon classes. So it's not unusual for them to leave together, although they usually take separate cars. One day, I decided to wait for Alexis outside her class to surprise her with lunch. I watched everyone coming out of the class, but Alexis wasn't among them. I texted her to ask where she was, and she replied, "Just go to the class. Going home to study." I called her, but there was no response, which struck me as odd because she had just texted me a moment ago. She didn't answer until much later, which is unusual for her as she's often on her phone. Later that day, I bumped into Brooke, and she casually mentioned that Derek had stayed home sick, and she was planning to bring him some soup. At the time, I didn't think much of it. However, when I got home later that night, I noticed that Alexis's car was in the exact same spot it had been all day. She typically parks in guest parking since our unit only has 3 spaces, so her car usually moves around. I asked her if she had gone to class and she hesitated before admitting she skipped because she found the professor's explanations frustrating. She knows I dislike it when she skips classes because it has affected her grades before. However, she had been doing better recently. While I was doing the dishes, I kissed her and told her I trusted her judgment. She explained that she probably wouldn't skip again because being alone in the house when bored was unpleasant. We laughed, and the night went on as usual. We went to bed. And as I lay there, almost drifting off, something struck me. She shouldn't have been alone because Derek was supposedly homesick. Right? She was still awake on her phone. I suddenly woke up and asked her where Derek was today, considering Brooke had mentioned he was homesick. She seemed surprised by the question, possibly because I went from half asleep to wide awake with a random inquiry. She said he had been here a bit in the morning, but went out to run errands or something. She wasn't sure. After the other incidents, I couldn't help but feel that her scattered response to this question seemed off. Although it might just be my imagination. The second incident occurred when I went to throw some things in the kitchen garbage and noticed a rubber wrapper of the same brand that Alexis and I use. It wasn't very visible, tucked behind a cereal box, but its distinctive color caught my eye. It was torn. Derek always uses a different brand. It was unusual because we typically keep the wrappers in our own room's garbage cans so they don't end up in the kitchen. Additionally, due to exams and stress, Alexis and I hadn't been intimate in a few days. I didn't go searching for a used protection or anything. I just returned to the room to check if some of our supplies were missing. It was hard to tell because we buy in bulk. My initial thought was Brooke and Derek might have run out and taken from our stock without asking, which upset me. Later that night, I brought up the rubber wrapper to Alexis, and she seemed surprised. When I mentioned my theory, she became unusually agitated. She's usually very calm, but went on a rant about their invasion of our privacy. I suggested talking to them about it, but she immediately shot down the idea and made me promise not to bring it up unless they did it again. It struck me as strange because we're generally open about sexual topics. But living together might have made Alexis uncomfortable discussing it. She comes from a conservative small town and isn't as open about these things as we are. Derek and I get along with the guys in the neighboring apartment, who are also graduates of our university. We don't hang out, but we have a friendly relationship where we exchange small talk about sports or chat in the hallway. It's comfortable enough that we can ask each other to keep it down without it being awkward. This brings us to the third incident that occurred last Monday. I was alone at the apartment when I bumped into one of the guys from next door. We chatted about football, and then he mentioned that one of the couples in our apartment complex was really into morning intimacy, and the walls were too thin for their liking. I chuckled because Alexis and I occasionally had morning activities on weekends, when we had the place to ourselves. Brooke and Derek typically spent weekends at her parents' house, which was about an hour and a half away. But as the day went on, I realized we hadn't engaged in morning activities for about a month. On weekends, it had shifted more towards the evening or not at all. Did he mean on weekdays? It made me uneasy. I considered asking for more details, but the conversation ended, and I felt like I missed my chance. Plus, it's an awkward question, and I might just be overly suspicious. So here's my dilemma. Am I overthinking things? Am I seeing signs that aren't there? Or is something actually going on? And if something is amiss, how should I proceed? I'm hesitant to ask her directly at this point because, for one, I don't want to seem jealous or paranoid if nothing happened. And two, if there is something going on, I don't want them to become more discreet about it. One idea I had was dropping by one of these mornings when they're alone together, but I'm unsure of the right timing. If I show up too early or too late, they might become more cautious. Update. Most of you recommended that I talk to Brooke and consider walking in on the situation. I decided to do both. Sunday night, everyone was back in the apartment. I had planned to talk to Brooke privately about our neighbor's comment. But before I could, she said something that completely contradicted my theory. She told Derek to go to bed early for work the next morning. What? I knew Derek had a job on campus, but he had always worked night shifts casually. I asked when he started working mornings, and he said he picked up the extra shifts a month ago. Starting at 9 a.m., I leave for my day at 7:45 a.m. So it's possible I hadn't noticed. I spent the night trying to figure out if he was lying. If there were still mornings, he was at home. Or if Alexis might be seeing someone else in the mornings, as some of you suggested. Or maybe I was just being paranoid. I went to bed feeling drained and confused. The next morning, I left for my classes as usual. Alternating between wanting to rush home to check on Alexis and thinking I had too much work to chase a theory I wasn't sure about anymore. Eventually, I headed home after my first class. In a strange way, I almost wish I hadn't. When I arrived at the apartment, Derek's car was absent. Only Alexis's car was there. My heart raced as I walked to the apartment. I didn't know what to expect outside the apartment door. Immediately, I heard a guy's voice from inside, chatting, laughing, and a soft feminine voice responding with giggles. I've seen various reactions to this situation on this subreddit, but I had never thought about what I do in such a situation. I pressed my ear to the door trying to catch their conversation, but I could only make out a word here and there amidst the giggles. Then I heard Alexis being tickled and shrieking. Maybe I should have waited longer. Looking back, I wish I had. However, as soon as post, but he's one of the guys in the apartment next to ours, not the one who initially tipped me off. I never liked Mark. His know-it-all attitude and his inappropriate comments towards both girls. But I had never suspected this. As soon as I opened the door, both of them looked at me with guilty expressions, dispelling any naive doubts I might have had about the situation being innocent. I had intended to confront them or demand answers, but my eyes welled up with tears, and I didn't want them to see me like that. So I simply said, "Nice, real nice," and hurried back to my car. I could hear Alexis yelling my name in the hallway, but I didn't stop. I half expected her to chase after me, but when I reached my car, no one was following. I drove to a nearby park and sat there in disbelief. Strangely, my first thought was, how is my family going to react to this? What on earth am I going to tell them? My family absolutely adores Alexis. They often joked about our wedding and considered her a part of the family. Then I started thinking about our living arrangements, our final exams, and the fact that in about 2 weeks, I can't handle moving right now. I'm in the midst of applying to an extremely competitive graduate program, and I can't allow anything to jeopardize that, especially not this. Fortunately, a friend has offered me a place to stay. I'll have to return home at some point to get my clothes, and I'm planning to do that during a lab period. Alexis took about an hour before she started blowing up my phone, but once she did, the messages didn't stop. She initially asked me to come home so she could explain even before I had a chance to respond. Then she sent another message begging me to return because she was having an anxiety attack. Something I'd always helped her through. Maybe I'm heartless, but all I could think was good. You earned it. There was a pause, and then she said, "I don't understand why you're so jealous. We were just hanging out." I waited and she continued. "I know it may look sketchy, but trust me, if I were in your shoes, I think the same thing." But we weren't doing anything. He needed advice on girl problems. You have to believe me. Honestly, I don't believe her. Normally, I'd feel a strange sense of satisfaction watching a cheater struggle to cover their tracks. But my mind kept replaying all the wonderful times we had together and wondering if she was cheating back then too. I'm torn between wanting to know when this started and being worried about it. This has been going on for more than just a month, and I have my suspicions. Later that night, I received a text from an unknown number. It turned out to be the friendly guy from next door. He mentioned that he got my number from Derek and expressed his profound apologies for what I'm going through. He admitted he should have told me sooner, but wasn't entirely certain. He knew his friend was involved with a girl who had a boyfriend, but didn't connect the dots until he learned her name. As many of you suspected, his earlier comment was an attempt to clue me in. So I guess he's the bro of the year. I don't think Derek and Brooke are aware of this yet. I haven't messaged them. I haven't found the right words. I know this is going to turn our living situation in friendships upside down. I suppose I should message them before Alexis spins a different narrative. So it turns out it wasn't Derek. It was one of our neighbors. A fact we didn't know until now. Given this mess, the only silver lining is that it seems like Obi-Wan has nothing to do with Alexis. And their relationship is over as it should be. But we can't be completely sure of that yet. Let's move on to the next update to see what unfolds. A quick clarification on the last update. When I walked in, they weren't literally in the act. They were just sitting on the couch with a deer in the headlights look that was highly incriminating. They both fell silent, and it was clear this wasn't a, "Hey, guess who dropped by" kind of situation. Anyways, on to the latest update. I've been incredibly busy with the semester wrapping up, and I heeded the advice to bury myself in my work. I've spent a lot of time at the library because Alexis doesn't go there. While posting the last update, I realized how foolish it was that I hadn't reached out to Derek and Brooke to share my side of the story. I took a screenshot of the text from the friendly neighbor, Will. Just a side note. All names have been changed except Mark because within a minute, Derek bombarded my phone with calls and texts, making it clear he had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, Alexis was sending texts practically begging me to meet up with her. I felt awful and replied to Derek with a single text, saying I wasn't in the mood for talking. Then I put my phone away for the night. The next morning, I received a text from Derek inviting me to my favorite restaurant for dinner and drinks, assuring me that no one else would be there, not even Brooke. I haven't had much of an appetite since all of this happened, but the offer meant a lot and I genuinely wanted to see him. So I decided to go after my classes. I arrived at the restaurant first, my heart, and my throat, worrying that Alexis might somehow be there. Thankfully, she wasn't. When Derek showed up, he gave me a big hug and immediately asked, "Dude, what the heck?" Now things get a bit crazy and dramatic. Many of you suggested that Brooke might side with Alexis or had been covering for her the entire time. I wasn't so sure because even though she's closer to Alexis, she and I have been friends for a bit longer. According to Derek, as soon as he told Brooke, she was absolutely furious. In his words, "I sort of wanted to give Alexis a piece of my mind, but Brooke handled that and then some." You might remember I mentioned that Alexis came from a conservative small town. Her parents had no clue we were living together, and she always stressed that they shouldn't find out as they might cut off her financial support. Her parents liked me enough to be polite, but they were constantly concerned that our relationship might distract her from school or lead to an unplanned pregnancy. Derek explained that Brooke demanded Alexis pack her things and find a new place, or else she'd spill the beans to her parents. Derek mentioned that later that night, he heard Alexis crying in the living room while hanging a sweater I had left behind. She was wailing about her life being over when Brooke emerged from her bedroom and said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't have left Mark then." It's kind of funny to imagine that moment. Brooke has always been a no-nonsense girl with a hot temper, but I certainly didn't expect her to react this way. It was incredibly touching that she took cheating so seriously during that dinner. All my worries about losing my friends were completely washed away, and I managed to eat a few pieces of sushi. When we left dinner, Derek offered to let me know when Alexis was gone so I could move back in. I declined his offer for a few reasons. Firstly, even if she does move out, everything in that apartment reminds me of her, from Derek and Brooke to Alexis and Mark, and I don't really want to sleep in it. Secondly, in my current emotional state, I don't want to feel like a third wheel with a happy couple. Even though I'm sure they'd be understanding. He understood my points, but told me to inform him if I changed my mind. It seems like Brooke and Alexis's friendship is pretty much over. This week has been quite uneventful, but I've had to avoid Alexis. Fortunately, I'm in an undergraduate program with only 60 students. I asked 2 friends to keep an eye out for her after sharing the story and started showing up to class at the last minute. To my knowledge, she only waited outside one of my classes. I received a text saying she had been spotted in front of that classroom, and it mentioned waterworks are in progress. Proceed with caution. I ended up skipping that class because I wasn't sure if she would leave. And I really didn't want to risk an uncomfortable encounter. Later that night, she sent me a lengthy Facebook message explaining everything from the beginning, and it made me feel sick reading it. I thought about not reading it, but once I opened it, I couldn't stop. She mentioned that he had been flirty with her in the halls, and she tried to be friendly in return, but it might have seemed like flirting because he kissed her mid-sentence. At one point, she expressed guilt for inadvertently leading him on, which made it difficult for her to reject his advances. She mentioned that it had happened only 3 times and she hated it. She stated she was going to end it. During the conversation I walked in on, she expressed understanding if I needed time and space, and she said she would do anything to make it right. She offered to treat me like a king, assuring me I'd never have to cook, clean, or do my laundry again. She wanted full access to her phone and passwords, even suggesting we install Life 360. An app to track her location through her phone. She wanted me to cut off all contact with Mark and her male friends just to be safe, I suppose. She offered makeup execs whenever I wanted. Does that sound like a healthy relationship to you? I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to keep her on Facebook and watch the drama unfold. She was posting dramatic statuses and song lyrics about mistakes, forgiveness, and some related to our song. But I know myself too well. I don't want to compulsively check her page and sift through old photos, so I blocked her. A few hours later, Derek texted me, saying she was crying and screaming because I blocked her. In happier news, the family I'm staying with is fantastic. I felt a bit guilty about taking up their space and using their electricity. So I offered to pay rent and contribute to some bills. Even though I'm unemployed, my family provides me with a decent allowance for rent and food. However, they declined the offer and said the first month is free. If I need more time here, we'll discuss it. They said with a wink. A friend told me they've hosted his and his sister's troubled friends before, so it's not a big deal to them. I'm incredibly grateful. Regarding the helpful neighbor, I called him to express my gratitude. He mentioned that Mark has been unusually quiet these past few days, and informed another guy that he had been dumped. Whatever. I don't want to think about it. I sent Brooke a message thanking her for kicking Alexis out, and she said she'd do it regardless of whether or not I moved back in. She's going to give me a heads up on when Alexis is gone so I can get the rest of my things. In the meantime, I'm spending a lot of time studying, applying to grad school, and hanging out with the guy I'm living with. I'm going to wait until after finals to tell my parents about the situation because my mom asks a million questions about everything, and I'm not in the mood to answer them. Once finals were over, everything hit me like a ton of bricks. I went through my social media and removed all the pictures with her. Threw out items that reminded me of her, and even removed our songs from my playlist. We'd been inseparable since we met, so this was over 2 years of memories. To put it shortly, it was really tough. But I had this urge to get it all done quickly. Then a particular Redditor messaged me expressing concern that Alexis might be struggling with dangerous thoughts now that she's lost everything. Her closest friends, her boyfriend, and her apartment. I know it might sound dramatic, but that message stuck in my mind. What Alexis did was absolutely terrible, but I thought a final conversation might give me better closure and maybe help her understand that it's truly over and encourage her to move on. So I messaged Alexis saying that if she wanted to talk, we could meet up somewhere, but there was no way we could be together after what happened. So please don't ask. Surprisingly, she responded almost immediately asking when and where. We agreed to meet at an off-campus coffee place. When I got there, she was already at the table and tried to hug me, but I waved her away. I felt terrible, but I wanted to get this conversation over with. She asked how I'd been and how finals went, but I interrupted and asked her if she had been unhappy in our relationship. Her eyes widened, and she repeatedly said, No, before falling silent. So I asked her why she did what she did if she wasn't unhappy. She started by retelling the story about having trouble saying no and how he was very pushy. I interrupted her and asked her to stop with the excuses and take responsibility. At least for what happened after he kissed her mid-sentence. But having sex 3 times, no way. She looked down, shrugged, and admitted, "You're right. I know." She began tearing up, apologizing and saying how sorry she was. Then she asked if there was any chance we could get back together, which I somewhat expected even though I told her not to. I just shook my head. I suggested she could continue living with Derek and Brooke if she wanted to. But she declined and said she already had plans to move in with another girlfriend. From there, the conversation became circular, with them trying to explain her actions as difficulties in turning down guys due to her fear of being seen as unfriendly. And me trying to get her to admit that excuse was nonsense. I don't know why, but I really needed her to stop using that crutch and admit that she had ruined a perfectly good relationship all on her own, but she just wouldn't. She was always stubborn. Eventually, I let it go, and we parted ways somewhat amicably. As I was leaving, she grabbed my hand as if to say something, but ended up shaking her head and letting go. Initially, the conversation made me feel worse than before. But ultimately, it made me realize that she was never the kind of person I wanted to be with, even without the cheating. She never took responsibility for anything, failing classes, not finding a job or internship and more. It was always someone else's fault. I just hadn't thought about it too deeply. After the coffee meeting, I met up with Derek and we went to the apartment. Brooke was there, but she mostly stayed in her room. We had some beers, played video games and talked about everything that had happened. Derek admitted they hadn't been able to find a third roommate. Aside from complete strangers, they didn't want to move in, and they asked me again to stay with them. I could tell that Derek really wanted me to, and I felt guilty about them being stuck with the lease, so I accepted. I told them I'd wait until Alexis took all her furniture and belongings from before I even moved in, as I still didn't want to sleep in that bed. Life isn't perfect now, but I'm doing better. Alexis moved her things out. I bought a second-hand bed and dresser from another student. I had my first round of classes last week. And although I might sound like a total nerd, they're really cool and hands-on. And the professors are incredibly nice. Derek and Brooke have been really supportive and don't make me feel like a third wheel at all. I saw Mark in the hallway once, and he completely ignored me, and I ignored him. But the urge to punch him in the face was very real. I guess that's something that will go away over time.